What's up, everybody? This is Zach and Rock from SquadCast.
And we help professional podcasters record remote interviews in studio quality.
So today we're here to talk about how to have a remote interview and reduce the stress and anxiety that can come with a remote interview. Unfortunately, having a remote interview is sometimes the best way to have an interview because you can reach anybody, from anywhere in the world. But it also does come with its barriers that can make things frustrating. So we're here to walk through the top 3 ways that you can reduce the stress and anxiety for your next remote interview. So Zach, can you explain to me what those 3 things are, and then we'll dive deeper into each of them?
Yeah, the history of remote interviews is fraught with anxiety. So we want to minimize that by doing these 3 things. So first thing is to give yourself time to empower your workflow. Remote interviews have, like you were alluding to, they have their pluses, but a few things that you need to kind of get ahead of to not be minuses. And the second thing is to do pre-interview preparations with both you and your guest, with your setup and your guest setup. And the third thing is to really have a workflow established that empowers your remote interview to capture that audio in really high quality for both you and your guests, and really just not have the technology get in the way beyond the initial setup, so you can focus on that conversation. And then having the equipment necessary, because podcasts can kind of it's a lot of technology, but it does come into the real world with stuff like microphones and cameras and computers. So having those 3 things dialed in can really help.
So the first one, give yourself time. How do we do that on our podcast between 2 mics?
Yeah, we're co-hosts, so we connect in the recording session a few minutes in advance to get us in there, get our levels, our mics set up, make sure we're plugged into power, all of those things that can be kind of put our phones on silent. All those little things kind of add up to be a few minutes in advance of the conversation. Also, get some water, just make sure whatever it is that's going to make you feel comfortable for the next hour, 2 hour long conversation. That time can really help in advance. And that really goes into the second point with preparation. What are some of the things that we do in advance of our interviews to prepare both us and our guests?
Sure. So we like to communicate the expectations of what questions they can expect to be asked, where the general flow of the conversation will go. We ask them for that. We give them the opportunity to tell us where they want the interview to go. Maybe they have a book deal coming up that they want to highlight at some point, so we definitely want to make sure we're covering that, and so that them being on our show is mutually beneficial. So really it's providing an outline of okay, how is this going to go, what equipment we're using, just stuff like that. It's all about communicating expectations. Also telling them to consider your guest is not necessarily an audio expert or specialist, so they're not going to consider stuff like mic technique or the environment of the room. So helping them understand that you can have a good mic and all that stuff, but the environment is just as important, if not sometimes more important. So just communicating all that stuff up front, I think, is the best way to have it.
Yeah, have that transparency, be on the same page. And then also one thing that I've found useful, lesson we learned from one of our mentors, Jordan Harbinger, is that he clicks record well before the proper interview actually starts. And then that way it kind of reduces that anxiety. You can do a little bit of sound checking and start and stop if you need to or whatever.
Breaks the ice,
exactly. So kind of start off the interview, and then at some point just be all right, we're at it. So that way it's more of a transition into the recording process, because even if you're super comfortable on the mic or in front of the camera, your guest is likely not. So they just need a few minutes to kind of get comfortable and forget that it's recording.
Cool. So point number 3 is the workflow and equipment. So this is the first 2 were really about before you actually hit that record button. Now it's showtime. How can a workflow and equipment help you reduce stress in a remote interview?
Yeah, big thing is scheduling, making sure you're on the same page, time zones, all that stuff. That's kind of where the workflow begins. And then it goes into the production, making sure that your tool stack is kind of in order and dialed in. That way you're able to capture that conversation, and you're not you're being respectful of your guest's time is, I guess, what we're after there. And you don't want them waiting around for you to fiddle around with your microphone setting or whatever. So having that workflow in place, so that way when your guests connect, you can click record and everybody's super comfortable. You don't have to go through this pre-flight checklist. You've already done that because you've given yourself that time and preparation in advance. And equipment, because it comes into the real world, can be part of that. So just making sure that you're fully aware of how to operate the equipment that you've invested in to get the highest quality audio out of it.
That was great. All right. So those are the 3 ways that you can reduce the stress and anxiety in your next remote interview. And those are: give yourself enough time, have some pre-interview prep where you can communicate expectations to your guest, And then the final is have a established workflow and equipment that you're comfortable and familiar with using. So again, this is Zach and I'm Rock and we're SquadCast.
Yeah, so with SquadCast, we have a platform to help record remote interviews that is really geared toward the workflow of podcasters. We've worked really closely with the community over the last 3 years to dial in what is beneficial for the pre-interview with preparation and scheduling, down to the actual interview, making sure it's easy to set up that technology and connect with your guests, have a great conversation while the technology kind of flows into the background, and then being able to work with all the equipment that you've invested in on both ends. That way your guest sounds just as good as you. So if you're interested in that, check out squadcast.fm and set up a demo or practice session with us anytime. Thank you.